In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at all of the 2023 AFL stadiums, and I'm going to be ranking my favourites ahead of this video on TierMaker. I'm not sure if many of you guys know, but 3.5 years ago, I did this exact same type of video, and the quality, well, for starters, was absolutely garbage. But also, at the time, I only attended like 6 or 7 of them, so I had barely much of a say. I've now doubled my account, so I've got a lot more to talk about, a lot more, experiences and all that. And the things that I'll be helping to decide my placings in this TierMaker will be the capacity, the atmosphere, the viewing quality of the stadiums, the food/prices, as well as the overall history. Now, there are some stadiums in this list that I have yet to attend, but I'll be helped out by someone else that you guys might know to help me decide the position to where I put them. Let's just start off with this one, the Adelaide Hills. New addition to the AFL in 2023 through Gather Round. I went to this one when North took on the Lions, and if we're talking about uniqueness, this would have to be right up there, an S or A+. Like, it was so unique. It was just something that I've never seen before at an AFL game. It felt like, well, not even a local AFL game, because it just felt like we were in the middle of nowhere. We were elevated like 300 meters above sea level, and it was just the most crazy experience, taking a hike there. The stadium in itself, like, if we're talking about actual ground surface, it was as good as the MCGs. Like, the turf was amazing. A lot of the stands there were not actually built for the stadium. It was all temporary for Gather Round, because if they didn't include those stands, it would have pretty much just been a ground where everyone was standing. So obviously, capacity-wise, atmosphere-wise, well, I think the atmosphere was actually half decent. It is the smallest ground in the AFL. It's not a proper AFL stadium, so you know what? I will keep it in C for now, because I genuinely reckon it was so cool to be a part of, but you can't have it any higher than C, and quite honestly, it might still drop down to the D tier. Alrighty, what do we got next? Let's go another new ground 2023 through Gather Round. We'll go Norwood Oval. Now, Norwood's a difficult one, honestly. Honestly, liked Mount Barker more in terms of like the quality of the ground. It was certainly, I thought, better at Mount Barker. But when we talk about like the stands, the history, obviously it's got a rich history through the Sandful, and it had a fairly decent capacity, I think, of 20k. So I think I'll also probably put it in C for now. This ground's really interesting as well, because it's kind of like a local ground. They've got a canteen there. You wouldn't say a canteen in any other big, mainstay stadium. Yeah, when it comes to viewing, the viewing quality, especially in the big grand scan, is pretty poor. Like, you could barely see anything if you're in a terrible spot. I mean, there were houses, like, literally right outside the stadium where you could watch the game in, which I thought was pretty cool. You know what? We might actually drop the 2 to D, just because we've got all these other tiers and we need the D slot to be filled in. We'll go Mars Stadium. In terms of my experiences, like, there'll be a bit of, personal experience that'll come to, play with some of these rankings. I definitely enjoyed my stay a lot more at Mount Barker, because obviously I was there when the weather was terrible at Mars, but I think it's a decent ground for what you get, honestly. It's a smaller ground. They're not going to play too many games there. Smallish capacity of around 12k. I thought the atmosphere was actually quite good, considering it's major, predominantly Bulldogs fans. So there was actually a pretty good atmosphere at the game as well. When I was there, the weather was pretty poor, but there was a section, with the grandstand that you could go undercover, which does help this stadium a little bit out. And I thought the food there was okay, but at the end of the day, it's Mars Stadium. I've only been there a couple of times, once for the AFL. I think it's a better ground than Norwood Oval. It's probably not. I think there's more of a history behind Norwood Oval, but the viewing spots at Mars better. More of a history behind Norwood, actually, so I'm going to have it above Mount Barker. But I'm going to have Mount Barker ahead of Mars Stadium, because I just like the ground more. Surface and all that as well. Alright, where do we go next? Let's go Giant Stadium in Sydney. Now, straight off the bat, I think this one has to be a little bit above the C tier in the B section, but not too much higher than that. I think at the end of B, because let's be real, it's one of the, I guess, major grounds in the stadium. It's a home stadium for GWS, so they play most of the games there. Now, it might not have the lowest capacity of any ground in the AFL, but when it comes to atmosphere, it's the worst in the AFL, probably by a mile, to be honest with you. Like, every time I'm there, there's like no atmosphere whatsoever. They don't care where you sit, because of the fact that there are no seat, like no one's sitting anywhere. You can walk around wherever you want, which I think is kind of cool, to be fair. But yeah, at the end of the day, there's not really much you can say about Giant Stadium. Certainly a unique one of the most unique stadiums in the AFL for sure. And I'll say one thing that's good about the Giant Stadium as well. They have a subway there. So you know what? We're not going to have that in C, just for the fact that they've got a subway at Giant Stadium. And let's go next and go Manuka or Manuka. I never get their name right. People always give me rubbish for that. We'll go probably the C tier. I'd say better than all of the other ones I mentioned behind, but still not really too much to say out of Manuka Oval. Pretty small ground. There's a hill, which I think is kind of cool. Not much of an atmosphere though, because, always GWS play there, so a smallish capacity, smallish atmosphere. A bit of a history behind it, I guess, because it's in Canberra, but at the end of the day, yeah, it's got to be in C, and to be honest with you, it's hard to split these Midas stadiums apart. We'll have it ahead of the Seas tier for now. Go Metricon Stadium next. Now, I haven't been to Metricon in almost 9 years. The last time I was at Metricon was way back in 2015, but I am going again in a couple of weeks. So, you know, my opinion of the ground might change after that, but at the moment we'll probably stick it in the B section ahead of Giants, because at least with Metricon, I just like the stands a little bit more. I like the feel of it, the uniqueness of the ground a little bit more. And there's always kick to kick after the ground whenever you're at Metricon. There's never been kick to kick at Giants Stadium for some reason. So because of that, you got to give more bonus points to Metricon. I've been to kick a couple of times when I was there. And I do think there's a slight little bit more atmosphere when you are at Metricon as opposed to Giants. So they're pretty similar with the way they are. I've been there before for a St Kilda game. A lot of empty seats as you'd expect, unless it's like a Richmond game. But it's still an okay ground and a relatively cool one. Definitely one that I'd recommend at least attending once. Next up, let's go the Gabba. The Gabba was the most recent addition into the stadiums that I've attended. And it's probably going to just sneak into the A's. I'm going to sneak it into the A's because it dumps on Metricon. Metricon's like an Aldi version of the Gabba. The Gabba, 37k crowd. They've hosted the grand final there. They got one of the better atmospheres, I would say, in the AFL, because now that Brisbane are good, there are a lot more fans there, and you know they get pretty loud and about for the games at Gabba as well. Pretty good vibes, pretty good entertainment as well when you're at the game. A lot of like pre-game stuff. Or when I was there, they had that big free stuff. Now, Saray, when I was there, said it himself.
A lot better stadium.
He was in the middle of the ground.
The ground is a little bit on a hill, so the viewing quality is a little bit difficult when you're in the front row. And there are some sections that are blocked off. For example, the section when I was there for the second half sitting, which, you know, makes the experience not as good. But I do definitely like the fact that they have kick to kick off the ground. That is, I just think that's elite, honestly. And the Gabba at night is a nice ground. I was glad that I attended because I had a good time there. But I think the Gabba, one of the better grounds in the AFL. But nowhere near as good as some of the others we'll mention in this video. Alrighty, next up, let's go Marvel. Let's go Marvel Stadium. I'm here every other week pretty much for the Saints games. It's, yeah, definitely probably got to be an A+. Well, in A+, I mean, it's one of the biggest stadiums in the AFL. I think the third or fourth with a capacity of 54k. Unfortunately, though, because the smaller clubs are relegated to Marvel, the atmosphere at times doesn't really feel very good, to be fair. It depends, though, because sometimes for the MCG, if it's a really small crowd, like for example, a 30k Marvel crowd compared to a 30k MCG crowd, the Marvel atmosphere dumps on the MCG crowd. But there are times when the Marvel atmosphere, it's just dull. There's not too much history as well with the ground, but it's the only ground obviously with a roof, and there's not normally a bad seat in the house, unless you're sitting where I was sitting for the Carlton St Kilda game, which in that case, that was terrible. Obviously, when it's raining, there's a roof, which is a massive bonus. Yeah, I'll put it in A+, but not quite as good as some of the other ones as well. Now, the SCG, I'm not a fan. I'm actually not a fan of the SCG, to be honest with you. We're going to have it higher than Metricon and Giants, obviously. I mean, there's much more of a history behind the stadium for starters, and obviously the capacities are much higher as well. But I don't know. Again, unlike the Gabba, no kick to kick off the ground. I think having that addition makes, you know, a more exciting, more enjoyable experience. The food and pricing is terrible, not going to lie. It's probably the worst of any ground I've ever been to. Like $17 for the most mediocre wings that you've ever had. Just terrible, to be honest with you. But the viewing quality as well was kind of average. I'm not going to lie. Like, if you've ever watched a game at the SCG, have you ever noticed that the front 2 or 3 rows almost always empty, especially when it's not the biggest crowd? And that's because when you're sitting front row, you can't bloody see above the fence. Like, it's actually kind of hard to actually see if you're sitting front row, and you would think front row there'd be a lot of seats, but in the Saints cheer squad, there was like no one sitting there because it was crap. The Swans always have those clappers, which I find annoying as well. Yeah, something about the SCG I'm not that big of a fan of compared to some of the other stadiums in the AFL. Now, I have thrown this stadium in this list. I know it hasn't seen a game played in 2023, might not in 2024, but I did attend a game in 2022. This is Kazali Stadium. I just want to give my thoughts on Kazali's. We're putting in D, not just because of the game, because I know the game was terrible, but bloody hell, the ground's just not fit for the AFL, I don't think. Just, for starters, having any games in Cairns during the rainy season is a terrible idea, because you're just going to get crap, sloppy, wet weather games of footy with poor skills, which we definitely saw when I was at the game. And secondly, the ground surface conditions were appalling. The hill that covers a fair portion of the ground was completely soaked in mud. Like, I genuinely struggled to not slip over when I was walking on the ground. Obviously, small capacity, average atmosphere, barely any history. Food was terrible when I was at Kazali's. There's not much of a good thing I can say about the stadium, other than the fact that I guess it's kind of unique and it's kind of cool to visit for the first time. But yeah, I'm only going to put it in there just for the video's sake, but Cazaly's probably the worst of the lot. Now, we are leaving some of the better stadiums to last. We'll go to the two ones that I haven't attended before, Teo Stadium and Teo Traeger Park. We'll start off with Traeger Park. Harsh, because if I feel like if I went to one of the games, I probably have it maybe a little bit high, similar to the Mount Barker situation. But I'm going to put it in D ahead of Cazaly's because I just don't think it can get any worse. I do like the ground looking at it on TV, but it's a small capacity, small atmosphere, but I'm sure the vibe would be cool if I were to attend a game at Traeger Park. Teo Stadium, I'm going to have it above Mars Stadium as well. I just think just more about the game, the ground, to be honest with you. More about it. I think a bit of a high capacity, and I just think the scenery in the Northern Territory would be bloody elite. Like, I'd love to go to a game possibly next year, even if St Kilda don't play, just to see what it's like, because I genuinely reckon it'd be pretty cool. Now, not only have I not been to any of the grounds at the Northern Territory, but neither have I been to Tasmania for any of the footy games. So I figured, instead of me just, guessing, let me ring the man, the myth, the legend, the man from Tasmania himself, who'll know a lot more than I do, the Bev Show, and he can do the rankings for some of the Tassie grounds.
I reckon it's probably the better of the two footy grounds in Tassie. I think the capacity is pretty reasonable. The seating options pretty reasonable as well, where you can get some good viewing from most spots of the grounds. And usually they sell food at reasonable prices as well. And I think from a footy point of view, it's probably the better of the two venues we've got here in Tassie, and also as well, there's plenty of parking in the surrounds. And I'd probably say C. I reckon C. I think there's still there's still some room for improvement.
And we'll go Blundstone now. You've been there also.
It's probably a better cricket ground than footy ground, I reckon. It was more designed for cricket, whereas UTAS was more designed for footy. So, but it does the job, especially for North Melbourne games. It's got a good backdrop near a beautiful beach called Bell Reef. Yeah, there's just a few little cons. There's a big grandstand behind one of the goals, but then at the other end, there's just a building. It's got the hill, which is not too bad, but it can let a bit of a wind into the ground, and also as well, it's in a neighbourhood which is not ideal either, because if you want to drive to the ground, then parking is a bit of an issue.
Yeah.
You've got to park on the street and stuff like that. And I'd say the food is not really that great, quite expensive, and I don't think the quality is that good, but it's probably a C.
Alrighty, well, according to Bev, UTAS is better than Blundstone. I always thought it was the other way around. We've got 3 more to go. Let's start off with Optus Stadium. Now, obviously, Optus has got to go an A+. I don't think it's quite an S. I have been before. I'll be going again in a few days, but obviously, being a new ground, it's obviously very modern, and the light show as well. Like the LED lights all around the ground are pretty sick as well. Because I went there for the Man United game. So yeah, I would have it an A+. I don't think it's quite as good as the MCG. 40k less people, not much of a history. The MCG is better, but Optus Stadium is almost as good. The Adelaide Oval. Let's head to the Adelaide Oval one next. And I've always thought that Optus was better until I attended Optus for the first time, and then until Gatherround. Gatherround is what made my decision pretty much, and I think Adelaide Oval is the better ground of the two. We can only have one ground in S though, so we're gonna have it in A+, but almost in S. It's the most fun I think you can have at a stadium, to be honest with you. Even better than the MCG. The hill, honestly, at night, just sinking piss, watching the footy, not a care. It's awesome. It's so the hill is iconic. The Adelaide Oval scoreboard. It just works very nicely. It's all you really need for a stadium. Obviously, the atmosphere. I mean, I was there for the Showdown. I don't think you can get much better than a Showdown atmosphere, to be honest with you. Yeah, I mean, it ticks pretty much every box. Even the food. Maybe the food's a bit of a downer, but who really cares? And then, obviously, the best stadium of them all. I'll have to leave it to last. We're going in the S tier, and this isn't going to change, I don't think, ever when it comes to ranking stadiums. It can't have this one not at number 1 in the S tier. We've got the MCG. And it's 100k capacity. The grand final gets played there every year. It's got the best atmosphere when it's a packed out house. Best history. The only bad thing really about the MCG, because I'll say another thing, there's barely a bad seat in the house. I guess unless you're sitting at the very top of the nosebleed. But the one bad thing about the MCG, I guess as of late, the food. The food's gotten pretty bad when I'm at the stadium. There are quite a few better places, I think, in the AFL stadiums-wise that have better food. But when it comes to the best AFL stadium in the AFL, you're not better than the MCG. It's S tier for mine, and I think not many people can disagree with my decision there, I wouldn't say. I think we're going to have to put Mount Barker in the D here, just because it's Mount Barker, to be honest with you. I will keep Norwood at the end of C's. But anyways, those are my views on the AFL stadiums in 2023. Now that I've been to pretty much all of them, I've got more of a say on, you know, how I like it and what there is about it. Of course, I'd like to go to all of these ones, and maybe next year I'll try and go to a couple in Tassie, maybe go to the NT for a couple of games. We'll see, I don't know, maybe. But yeah, anyways, hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you haven't already, leave a like, subscribe, and check out the Bev Show. See you very soon, though, for my next video. I've got a box break with Romy Has coming up, as well as a Goal King challenge with a few bigger creators. So stay tuned for that. It'll be out on the channel very soon.